All right, a couple of days ago, I finally finished this book, and I thought I would give a review from my chaotic schizoid ace perspective before I completely forget all my opinions of it. Short version. Okay, I think it's well written. I think the fantasy world she's constructed is amazing. I think the romance just got in the way. Now, one of the little comments on the back does say sizzles with sexual tension. I didn't really there's some points where it's blatant, but mostly she's just like, oh yeah, he has muscles. Oh yeah, I like his jawline, and it sort of builds up, and it's stupid. No, look, so I'll read the blurb just in case. Feyre is a huntress, and thankfully they tell you how to pronounce Feyre at some point in the book, because I didn't know. The skin of a wolf would bring enough gold to feed her sisters for a month, but the life of a magical creature comes at a steep price, and Feyre has just killed the wrong wolf. Taken prisoner by a high Fey lord, why would you choose a character name that is so close to another word that you're constantly using through the book? It just annoys me. Anyway, taken prisoner by a high Fey lord, Feyre learns that her masked captor is masked captor. It's hard to say quickly. Is hiding even more than his piercing gaze suggests. But as Feyre's feelings for Tamlin begin to burn through every warning she's heard about his kind, a shadow is falling across the land, and if Feyre cannot fight it, she will lose everything. The first book in a sweeping romantic fantasy series, blah 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 blah. And a couple of other comments about it say she's a master of fantasy and a dazzling world, complex characters, and sizzling romance. Yeah, okay, look, I'm ace and schizoid, so me not getting the romance part is kind of a given, but, so some comments, and I'm probably gonna end up giving spoilers as this goes on, because I'm not good at this kind of review stuff. That's why I gave you the upfront stuff. I think, it's pretty good. It's just the first half is a bit more of a slog, because there's literally rolling around in the grass at some points, and they do set up some of the magical world there, but it just takes a little bit too long. But once it gets to the second half and shit really hits the fan and the actual complication I don't know, it starts off with a complication, the opening is very strong, and there's all this oh, what's happening, blah blah blah, but then there's a chunk, I don't know, I'm guessing, maybe a chunk that's just her slowly getting used to her situation, and then it's everything's fine and magical, and let's roll about in the grass and go and see pretty things. And that part is boring. But yeah, once it gets to shit hits the fan, it's just action, 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 action. And one of the good things is the whole romance situation is mostly prevented from having anything other than pining. There's no actual contact for most of that. So yeah, and then the action part's good. I'm trying not to give spoilers. Okay, well, I guess this is where I will start giving more spoilers. So, basically the structure of the story is she's, because she killed the wrong wolf, she gets taken away to, she's taken prisoner. She gets taken to the land of the fairies, basically, and, she's very suspicious of them because they have a history of being really cruel to regular mortal humans. There was some war a long time ago. There's even a map, a map. And, this page is not really relevant, but this page is. And this is all that humans get down here, whereas fairies get that. And I kind of like that because, that's realistic. If there are magical creatures, they're gonna be much more powerful than poor little humans who can't do anything. Anyway, so she's very suspicious of them, but then she actually gets treated well, and as time goes on, she starts trusting this Tamlin character. But then, they get visited by a different character, a darker character, and from there, she gets sent back to the human world to try and keep her safe, but then she's talking to one of her sisters and has a revelation. She's like, oh no, I love the dude, I've got to go back. Even though, like, I mean, she's not completely useless because she's a huntress. Like, she's actually really good with a bow and arrow, which makes sense for a female character. I mean, you still, is the strength... I don't know. If you have the technique, I'm sure it's okay. It's a bit more realistic than her going in swinging with a sword, right? Okay? So, yeah, there's that. And she does manage to take out a couple of characters, you know, a couple of enemies with her bow and arrow earlier on. But later in the thing, she goes back to try and help in this sort of delusional way, although she kind of knows she's being delusional. Like, what can she do? But she decides she wants to try anyway, realizes everyone's been taken prisoner to another place, and so she follows. She gets some help to figure out where they are, and, you know, through the magic of secret caves, gets there a lot faster than she would otherwise. And then, yeah, that's where, like, this whole series of her going through different challenges happens, because there's an evil queen, and the evil queen's like, oh, if you really love this dude, because the evil queen wants the same dude, and has this complicated history with humans, and a complicated history of, you know, following her own idiotic passions to the detriment of her actual mission. So, of course, she tells her, oh, if you really love him, you've got to do these 3 challenges. Or answer a riddle. And if you answer the riddle, you don't have to do any of it. And everything is happily ever after. Of course, because you need to fill this much story, she's an idiot. And she can't figure out the riddle. I'm reading the riddle like, it's super obvious. Like, I thought I would be wrong because it's a little bit too obvious, but no, I ended up being right in the end. It's really cheesy and but of course she has to go through all 3 challenges, and then oops, no, there's a catch, because fairies are like lawyers, and if you don't accurately specify the terms of the deal, pray I don't alter the terms again, kind of deal. Yeah, so she ends up having to solve the riddle anyway, and then all the things that she went through, like, this is something that kind of made me go a bit like, all of that was kind of pointless, because all she had to do was just use her goddamn brain. She spent 3 months unable to answer this question, and it's only when she's, like, about to die, you know, the whole cliche galaxy quest. The time goes down to 1 second, and then the bomb stops, kind of. It's that kind of a situation. And then there are certain things, certain sacrifices that are made that never had to be made, and it's just like, I don't know. It's not, I don't think it's, that kind of annoyed me. But the way that the author wrote the challenges, it keeps you guessing, and it's like, yeah, you want to see what happens next. And then that's when the darker character comes back and becomes much more complex and actually much more interesting. And yes, he has to be a love interest too. So, and I want to rant about that a little bit, because they do have a preview of the next book. Now, I'm not going to get the next book. I talked to my psychologist about this, because she's like, oh, you know, you've been reading a lot. I have a diary, and she reads my diary. And so, you've been reading, what are you reading? And when I said this, my psychologist straight away knew the book and was shocked that I would read such a thing. Now, keeping in mind, this wasn't my choice. I should have mentioned that at the beginning of the video, but I've mentioned it before when I was reading that other book, the sort of, like, one that's borderline gay fairy, no, it pretty much is gay fairy porn, really. I think I mentioned at the end of that, and we unwrapped it, and we're like, oh shit, because all I knew is it would be fantasy, but my psychologist is like, no, this is like one of the most famous romantasy series there is, and I walked into it blind, and you know, she had a bit of a chuckle at my reaction, but she confirmed to me that the second book is even worse for annoying romance. And you know, my psychologist is constantly worried that she's not helping me enough, or like not helping me at all, because, you know, how do you treat schizoid? We're kind of guessing, and she comes up with stuff or tries to, but yeah, I don't know. I think if anything helps, it's usually subconscious. But by confirming that the next book is too much of the romance, too much romance in the ratio versus the fantasy action kind of thing. It's just too heavy on that. So she's actually saved me hours of my time and a few bucks as well if I had to buy them. I got this one for free. So yeah, I won't be going for the next book on this one. Oh my god. Shit, there was a thought that just went while I was talking about my psychologist and this romantasy blah blah. I don't know, I guess because I am just not interested. I don't know if, like, what this is another quote. Passionate, violent, sexy, and daring, a true page turner. But, like, there is a chunk in the beginning where it's not as hard to read as the other book. I don't even know where I put it anymore. Ravensong. Ravensong, the first half of that book was a real slog because it's just whine, go in a big circle, a big pointless circle where they achieve basically nothing. And before they get to the action. So it's a similar situation where the second half of the book is where the action really picks up. This was easier to get through, but a friend on Facebook was saying they couldn't even finish it, and it is because that focusing on her developing feelings for this magical character, it does slow down. Like it's sort of like one chapter is just like romantic fluff, and then the next chapter will be action and learning more about the fantasy world, and then the next chapter will be more boring romance, kind of garbage, and then it'll get back to the action. So it's a bit more like flip-floppy. And yeah, I can see how someone would get frustrated with that. Whereas Ravensong, it was just like, oh my god, get to the point. Where is this book going? Yeah, so that's the thing about the romance aspect. But, speaking of the second book, there is that excerpt at the end. And, she, so many spoilers, but she ends up making a deal with the dark character because in the course of the challenges she does, she gets pretty badly injured and none of her friends are able to help her out. So she has to make a deal with the dark dude where she ends up spending a certain amount of time a month at his, in his realm, because each of the fairy lords, they have their own kingdom or whatever. Oh, I don't know if you can see it. They have their own, where is it? Their own different realms. And so this is the spring one where she is with her dude, and this is where the night one is, and she has to spend a certain amount of time there. Yeah. But, and so I think that's where the second book picks up, is dealing with that situation. But it turns out the dark dude is actually kind of nice. And he's just hiding behind the creepiness, and it's sort of like, I guess it's more relatable. But, okay, so I don't know where these books go because there's 5 of them. And I haven't looked them up yet. I think if I want to know what happens next, that's what I'll do. But I just want to say, I think the dark dude is right, especially in the clip, the preview of the next book. He it's very vague because I think it's probably not the first chapter. I think it's a later chapter because it references other things that happened before it. And he's like, why are you staying with them? They, just want you to be with this dude and pump out babies, basically. And there's so much dumb stuff the more I think about it. Huge spoilers. So, the wolf that she kills was sent for the purpose of her to kill it, right? Because the evil queen took all the powers of the fairy lords and then was trying, she's into Tamlin. And Tamlin's like, I would rather marry a human than you, kind of thing, and insults her dead sister and all this kind of shit, and she curses him so that, he's got 49 years to find a human who hates fairies but agrees to marry him and actually falls in love with him and all this kind of shit. But he's not allowed to tell her, and none of the people in his court are allowed to tell her that that's the game that's going on. And okay, so he finds a chick who hates fairies, who kills a fairy without any provocation. It's a wolf, but it's a giant wolf, she should have known kind of deal. Yeah, she goes through that. And she gets taken to their kingdom under really false, dodgy pretenses, and then has to live her life there. And meanwhile falls in love. And she does fall in love, but then it turns out that the whole deal was that. So the whole time he's just trying to set up, he was trying to engineer a situation where she would fall in love with him, and then like, so in that case, does he really love her, or was he just going through that to get out of the curse? And, you know, now it's happily ever after, and he claims he still loves her and all that, but, you know, now he needs to, because he's got his powers back, now he needs to pump out an heir to the throne kind of thing, right? Like, it's supposed to be romantic, but it comes across to me as super manipulative, and I'm actually on the dark guy side, at least as far as this book goes. Maybe we'll find out what a dickhead he is in the next book, instead of just pretending to be a dickhead in here, although it sounds like he did tell on them and reveal to the chick that the girl was there. Although, I don't know, because apparently it was a few days before the 49 years was meant to end anyway. And, you know, he gave them the wrong name, and I have a feeling he knew it was the wrong name so that he can stay on the good side of the evil queen without suffering consequences. I don't know if he actually... I don't know. I think he probably did tip her off. So, like, he did cause a few issues, but I think by tipping off the evil queen, he actually engineered a situation where Feyre and Tamlin get together, because they're panicked, and he sort of accelerated the relationship that way because he wants his powers back too, so it's in his interests for these two to get together, but only then, and then after that, he wants the girl, and seems to want her more genuinely than Tamlin, who was just doing it to, you know, because he was forced to. I just don't think it's a healthy representation of what a relationship should be. And it also reminds me of, like, one of the relationships I had where you know, it seemed like it was a thing that kind of happened spontaneously. But then he eventually admitted that one of his friends who had messaged me previously about certain things, he'd actually set things up to try and push us together. And, like, that was kind of the last straw for me in terms of feeling like, no, the relationship's not working, because it didn't even come together naturally, and there was all this kind of shit going on in the background, and I was being manipulated. I don't like to be manipulated like that. And then, you know, I kind of stuck with it for a bit, but I think at that point, what was that? I think at that point I kind of knew that the relationship was just not, like, I knew from the beginning it wasn't gonna last, because I didn't know I was schizoid then, but I knew that, like, something wasn't right about me and that I wasn't really that invested in the relationships. But I thought, I'm just seeing what happens kind of thing, and, you know, eventually he'll realize that I don't care that much and he'll dump me. But that's not actually what happened. I still had to dump him. It was a real shame. Anyway, so it just made me think of that, like, being manipulated. She's manipulated into a situation to fall in love with the guy who is supposedly the good guy. And, you know, he acts sweet and all that, and gives her painting supplies and takes her to see pretty areas in the land of spring. But it's, like, so superficial. Whereas the dark guy, who gives me real vampire vibes, I think that's probably what he's modeled off. But, like, you know, he comes across as nasty, but when, like, you know, in this chapter that the preview chapter, it confirms that what he said in this book, he actually does. He takes her to his, you know, to his realm, and instead of doing anything horrible to her, like properly horrible to her, he starts teaching her to read, because one of the things that she fucks up in here happens because she can't read, which is not her fault. It's because of shit that happened in her childhood. But, you know, like, she could have died, and so he's trying to teach her to read, which is actually useful, and also teaching her to shield her mind so that it can't be mind read by people who do have bad intentions. And he's actually trying to do all this stuff knowing that she hates him and is suspicious of him. And, like, as far as I know, he's not under any kind of curse forcing him to fall in love with a human. Tamlin was. So I just think that's not healthy, Tamlin, you know. And I don't know, but it sounds like, and, you know, one of the other reasons, and this is a massive spoiler as well, one of the other reasons I don't want to read the second book is because at the end of this one, she gets turned into a fairy, and I'm like, oh, of course she does. How hard is it to just keep a human in the action? Because, you know, like, once you take the human element out of it, it's a little bit harder to relate to, and, like, a lot of the tension and drama in this is because she's human and she knows that she doesn't have the strength to take on a fairy, and, like, it's interesting seeing her navigate that world. Whereas once she's a fairy, it's like, okay, yes, she came from being human, but she just has to learn to be a fairy, and it's like, I'm not so interested in that. I don't know, it just, you know, you might as well just write a book all about fairies. Why even have the human element at that point? It's just how I feel. I'm not that into it. So yeah, I survived it. But I won't be reading anything else. My psychologist did say another one of this series, which one was it? Throne of Glass series. She said that one had more action, like a higher ratio of action to romance. But I am just like, yeah, nah. Especially reading the preview, like, I get it, but I just wasn't that interested in it. So I think if you're into romantasy, I'm sure it's fine. If you're more into the fantasy side than the romance side, though, it's tough. It's tough. And I think if you're, like, asexual, schizoid, or just apathetic and not into the romance stuff, it's tricky. And there are some scenes where I'm like, oh, when is it going to end? And then it gets back to the action. And so, like, the storytelling and the world building and the action when it finally comes along, that stuff is good. Like, right from the first chapter, I was like, holy shit, this is well written. I have to keep reading this. It's just like, then she ruins it with these sort of pointless romance scenes. But it's easier than reading, for me at least, it was easier than trying to read Lord of the Rings. I couldn't read Lord of the Rings because it's been a while, but I remember them describing stuff for too long in too much detail, and that's why I was just like, Although there was some emotional shit, you know, around my birthday that made me not want to read it. So it could be confirmation bias, but yeah, I couldn't finish Lord of the Rings. It was too much descriptive fluff, and this is too much romance fluff. Like, you could still tell this story without the ridiculous number of romance scenes. Like, you can make it clear that she's into him without getting so explicit. And, you know, there's a lot of good stories that do have a romantic element, that don't go into the ridiculous, unnecessary detail that this does. Also, like, I get that the romance is kind of her motivation to go back and save him, and that's why the action happens. But, again, actually, when you think about it, not entirely necessary, because the evil queen was planning to invade human lands, and she was worried about her family. So you could take the romance out completely, really, I think, and still be able to... oh god, I'm having some serious deja vu for some reason. Have I talked about something like this before? About a different book or something? Anyway, no, you could just have her trying to protect her family, because the story begins with her trying to protect and look after her family. You could just make that the complication that causes her to go back to the fairyland and take on the evil queen. You don't actually need the romance, really. I mean, there's a few things, a few twists and whatever, but, yeah, no, I'm just like, you could have done it without that, and it would have been a story that I prefer. Anyway, now I can set that aside, maybe give it away to someone or put it in. There's there's a few street libraries around. Maybe I could just chuck it in there and get rid of it that way. Someone who actually likes it can have it, because I got it for free. Maybe I just pass it on to someone else for free. Anyway, so those are some of my thoughts. If there's anything I've forgotten, I'll probably put it in a comment or in the description or whatever. But yeah, like, I can see why people like it if they're not as mentally ill as me, but I'm kind of relieved to be done with it. And then I'm gonna move on to, where's the next book that I got? I'll show you the next book that I got, which will probably be the next book that I review. So I bought this a while ago, and it's just taken me this long. Dreadful by Caitlin Rosakis. Would it hurt to be a little more ... good? An absolutely magnificent comedic fantasy. Comedic, not romantic. Now, I don't usually do comedy stuff, but let me read the blurb for you. Oh, there's some comments. Dreadful is pure fun. A spellbinding, literally, massacre of all our favorite tropes underscored with a pleasing dry wit. All the elements I love: fun, humor, breaking fantasy tropes, interesting and complex questions about identity and redemption, and some delightful goblins. Outrageously funny, a vital addition to the cozy fantasy genre. Okay, the blurb. And you'll see why I picked this one out soon enough. It's bad enough waking up in a half-destroyed evil wizard's workshop with no eyebrows, no memories, and no idea how long you have before the dreadlord whomever shows up to murder you horribly and then turn your skull into a goblet or something. It's a lot worse when you realize that dreadlord whomever is you. Fucking love it already. Gav isn't really sure how he ended up with a castle full of goblins or why he has a princess locked in a cell. All he can do is play along with his own evil plan in hopes of getting his memories back before he gets himself killed. But as he realizes that nothing, from the incredibly tasteless cloak adorned with flames to the princess, is quite what it seems, Gav must face up to all the things the dreadlord Gavrax has done, and he'll have to answer the hardest question of all: who does he want to be? It sounds fucking hilarious. And yeah, questions of identity, questions of good and evil, duality, whatever. Much more interested in reading this and relieved to be done with all the weird romance things, you know, like accidentally reading Ravensong was kind of like gay furry werewolf porn. I thought that A Court of Thorns and Roses was gonna be the straight version. Turned out to be a little bit more complicated. Like, there is shape-shifting, but it was not as big a thing, but it was still romance, and yeah, at times a little bit more explicit than I'm into. I mean, I'm not into any of it, but yeah, a little bit more explicit than necessary is probably the word I'm looking for. This, I'm hoping, is a bit more like PG, and it sounds funny, and it sounds like it takes the piss out of like all the things that turn up in these kinds of things, because yeah, there's a lot of cliches. Anyway, so we'll see how that goes. I hope it doesn't disappoint me, because I went into the other two books without the greatest of expectations. Ravensong, I was probably hoping for a bit more because I misunderstood what that was about. But The Court of Thorn and Roses, I had no expectation. I had no idea what I was walking into. And then this, if my expectations are too high, it could let me down. But cross fingers, it turns out to be more up my alley. Anyway, that's all for now. And I just finished an artwork. So I'm going to try and get back to other parts of my life, and that might include bonsai live streams, because I really, really need to get that done, but it depends on who's around the house and what the weather's like too, so we'll see. But I've got a few other videos. I've actually got a lot of videos on my to-do list, and it's just like, I need less hobbies, because I also want to still write music, and I'm just...